think that is one of the big challenges going forward. How are we going to try and make sure that we have, whatever our views about what to do, that we at least have accurate information to do it on? Nothing about that autism press conference makes me optimistic that it's going to happen soon.
Welcome to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
I'm John Timpane.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference. Today, we welcome back to the Musical Innertube our pal and frequent guest, Art Caplan. Art is one of the country's most prominent medical ethicists and one of our most influential commentators on what's going on in our medical and public health scenes. He is the Doctors William F. and Virginia Connolly Mitty Professor and founding head of the Division of Medical Ethics at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine in New York City. Welcome back to the Musical Innertube, Art Caplan.
Hey, thanks very much for having me.
With the title of bioethicist, you must have a lot of work going on with the current administration. And
well, that is true.
Yeah. One of the things that we're going to be talking about here is the administration's recent recommendations on autism. And a personal note, I have a son who's on the autism spectrum. He is, back in the 80s, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And since then, there's been a refining of the diagnosis of Asperger's. So he may be on it in even a different place than when he was originally diagnosed back in the 80s. It's a high-functioning version of autism. Getting him through school was tough. Officials and the teachers and us, nobody had any experience on training with autism, and we were all sort of flying blind in how to get him to get through life. I think if we were raising him today, it would be slightly different because of all the things that we have learned about autism in the last 20 years or so. The fact that RFK Jr. thinks there's an outbreak of autism probably just means that we've learned to identify it and cope with it a lot better. And we're recognizing it and treating it better than we did 10, 15 years ago. I also have to add that I have two brothers who have autistic children and two cousins. So I tend to lean into the idea that there's a genetic component to the condition. I have no idea. My wife didn't take a ton of Tylenol. I have no idea what my brother's wives and my cousins' wives took as far as Tylenol. But I think that instead of blaming Tylenol, we need to do a lot more research into it to figure out what causes autism, and more importantly, how to deal with autistic kids in the present time to make them useful people in society, which they can be. Even the most profoundly autistic people can contribute in one way or another. So now I'm off my soapbox. Art, get on yours. Start talking.
Well, look, the administration has just been, I think, a total mess, incoherent, disinforming, kind of frightening people, not helping them when it comes to autism. It's just been outside the boundaries. They had promised, I think about 6 months ago, to have a big reveal where they would tell us finally for all time what is the cause of autism. They bring together Trump and Kennedy and Oz and many other doctors from the federal government and announce Tylenol. And you have to just be sitting there thinking, I can't even believe they had the gumption to come out and try to target that as the cause of autism. Let me first, just a little history. First paper on autism was in 1943. It was dubbed early infantile autism. A guy by the name of Asperger, he was the doctor, basically developed the concept and the symptoms and so on. Although you can find in the medical literature references as far back as 1911 for sort of autism-like things. I believe Tylenol was released in about 1980, something like that. So that's a good 50 years of autism pre-Tylenol, which makes a little skeptical that autism is linked up to Tylenol. Secondly, this reveal about its Tylenol has no data. the announcement was kind of bananas, not for many reasons, but one big reason people have worried about things like Tylenol, aspirin use during pregnancy, studied it for 10 years, didn't find anything. What they found was there's a correlation. That is, a lot of people who have kids with autism have taken Tylenol. But that shouldn't surprise us because about the user rate for Tylenol in the US is about 55% of the population. So I don't think it's a surprise that people have taken it. But more to the point, you can correlate almost anything. You can correlate when RFK Jr. began talking about vaccines with the rise in autism. Maybe he's to blame. I don't know. You can correlate increases in average temperature, climate change with the rise in autism. Doesn't mean it's a cause. Just means it's an interesting association. And to be fair, scientists look for associations and then study them to see if they can establish a causal relationship. Nobody in the past 10 years in big studies has got anything causal with Tylenol, aspirin, and so on. The other thing, and then I'll stop ranting about this, although it really deserves ranting because it was, in my view, unethical what they did. Why? Because they scared women, thinking you caused your kid's autism because you took Tylenol. You couldn't, as Trump said, when he had a fever or pain, suck it up.
Yeah.
Suck it up? What the heck is that? Why do you say that to somebody who's got a high fever? But anyway, we do know this. Fevers are really dangerous to infants in the first trimester of pregnancy. That cause and effect is well established. Dr. Oz is standing behind Trump and Kennedy when they're blathering on, and he's nodding. But he learned in med school, first year, you got to get fever down in a pregnant woman, especially the first trimester. The miscarriage rate, I think, is 5 or 6 times what it is when you don't control fever. So just in terms of bogus cause, scaring people, not identifying something. You know how bad it was? You guys will like this. I thought the anti-vaccine crowd must be going nuts at this big reveal, at this press conference announcement about Tylenol because he didn't mention vaccines. So I did look online, and you can see a lot of the anti-vaccine people are saying, well, you know what? Autism is caused by people who got vaccinated and then took Tylenol.
Yeah.
So many things to say. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Art, this is not a new theory, this Tylenol thing. That was floating around. I remember hearing that back in the 90s. In fact, the other thing that has come back out is leucovorin, right?
Mhm.
And were you not surprised that in this big gala announcement, instead of broaching something new or maybe having some research to put forward, which they did not, that such an old warhorse was trotted out again?
Boy, having watched that thing from beginning to end, I don't know that anything surprised me because it began on a low note and then sunk into scientific oblivion. But leucovorin, just so we all know, what that is vitamin B12. And we know that that is good to take for pregnant women to prevent birth defects. Probably what the association was, folic acid, as it's also called. Women took more of it, they got fewer babies with spina bifida, hole in the development of the spinal cord. So that is an association. But there's no association with autism prevention. They don't see lower rates in women who have that. So that isn't something that's going to diminish symptoms, isn't something that's going to prevent autism in any known way. And what's also a little funny about it is Kennedy's out there babbling on about vitamin B12. When the association was made many years ago that having pregnant women have that available to them would help prevent birth defects, it was put in our food. So it's in bread, it's in cornmeal, it's in a lot of foods. They're called fortified with. You can sometimes see the ads.
Yeah.
My description of that is processed food, the thing that RFK Jr. thinks is, beyond horrible, probably has prevented a good number of kids having spina bifida by fortifying it with vitamins.
Yes.
Besides just scaring women who took Tylenol,
Yep.
or scaring women who had autistic children and thinking that it was something they did deliberately to bring on the autism. What about all of the different recommendations that have come out of HHS over the past few months? Vaccines is obviously the one that's played up most, although in the measles outbreak in Texas, there was a point at which RFK Jr. said, you can take the MMR vaccine if you like. But then, of course, he steered everybody to all of the quackery that's on the internet by internet savants and soothers. But what actual harm does it do to the medical establishment for these kind of press conferences to take precedence over research and scientific development?
Makes life pretty hard for the average. Let's just use Tylenol for an example. If you're an OB and you're managing a pregnancy, or a family medicine doc, or even a nurse, many of them manage pregnancies. All of a sudden, women are coming to you and saying, the top health official said Tylenol is bad. I don't think I should take it. What else you got? Well, the what else you got is known to be worse for you than Tylenol. Everybody focused in on Tylenol because it had the best safety record. So
Sure.
you certainly don't want to take other things to relieve pain. So that makes trouble right away. Then you also have the doubt. Let's say I say, take the Tylenol, get that fever down, but you think the woman's going to go home and just not do it because she doesn't want to hurt her baby. Understandable thing, but she's doing it the wrong way, but she may not admit it to the caregiver. So now you have to manage disinformation, dumb information, false information. And we see this, you mentioned that measles outbreak in Texas. There's a measles outbreak now in Minnesota. There's a measles outbreak now in South Carolina. Somebody just died, I believe, I forget the state, but a kid just died of whooping cough. And these are all preventable. And people still have this view, well, measles, not that bad. I would say what we neglect is not just deaths, because we're a little better at getting you to the ICU, but you have to go to the hospital and get managed when you have serious measles. And you wind up with kids who get deafness and other disabilities that are related to measles, and all preventable. And yet you're sitting there and you're saying to this, the mom and the dad, take your vaccines, take them in the schedule that we came up with. There are not too many. Trump is all worked up about too many vaccines. They'll say things like, well, you get 80 vaccines into children. No, you don't. Actually, 80 vaccines is what you'd get if you took every possible vaccine in a lifetime, not for kids. But here's something I'll tell you, just you gave a little personal revelation. Don, I'll give one. You know how many pills I take a day? 6. 6 every day. Maybe I'm taking too many all at once. Maybe I should spread them out. Maybe I should take one every week. Well, no, I'm taking them because we established through the research, if you want to prevent, cholesterol and you want to reduce your risk of a heart attack, take a statin. So
Right.
That's very common to take it every day. Well, without going into detail, point being, we take a zillion pills and nobody says it's too many, right? But they're worked up about vaccines because, I don't know, because it comes in a needle or something.
Well, I think that's a lot to do with it, doesn't it? The, blenophobia here.
Yeah.
I mean, people are much better than they were when I was a kid with the needle placement. Let me just say, because there was a place when we were little where they placed needles. It did not add to the pleasure. Yeah, back into the office for quicker service. That was the old joke.
Well, the doc, I'm so old that when I got my shot, the doctor came to my house and he said,
right,
you want to wear your Davy Crockett hat? Part of bravery, like Davy would take a shot bravely.
You could wear your coonskin cap.
Yes.
And if you survived the placement of the needle,
yes.
you might get some ice cream.
Yes.
Or or a lollipop. I remember the
Yes,
lollipops came in
yes,
real
big.
handy in persuading us we had not died.
I remember a couple of shots that I got where the lollipop was in my mouth at the time, which of course probably made dentists feel really good about the whole situation.
But you had
Uh,
fluoride then, something that we don't have anymore.
yeah, that whole scare. I still remember from the 50s that what fluoride turned you into a communist or something.
Right.
I'm
It
trying
was
to remember.
Dr. Strangelove and pure bodily fluids.
Yes. And it's funny too, because in looking back at the old wives' tales, shall we say, that we believed
Oh
in the
goodness.
50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s, and looking now and saying, oh, weren't we silly to believe that? Hopefully, in 10 or 15 years, we'll be looking back at this and saying, wasn't everybody silly to be so worried about vaccines causing anything?
I
Uh,
hope so, but what I worry about is 15 years from now, we won't have any scientists running around because they made so many cuts to the research pipeline. People are not going into careers there because they just don't see a viable future. So they're damaging the personnel, the availability of the scientists.
Yeah, it's such a good thing to point out is that this may be something being done for the sake of the public or ostensibly so, but it's not good public service to dissuade people from wanting to go into healthcare
Yeah.
professions.
that whole thing is all tied up in what Trump is doing with universities. That's another part and parcel of it. Not only is he coming out with misinformation about health and health care, but then he's going to the universities and saying, if you don't do what I want, I'm not going to give you the money that keeps you running. And part of that money, a lot of that money, I guess, is used for research and development at
Correct.
universities, which is where all of the research and development in science and in other technologies is done. It's done on the university level because when you get into the real world with a real job, they figure you already have that background, or we already have the basic research done, and now we're going to use it in a practical way. But if you don't have
Besides,
that bedrock, it's not going to work.
no, people say to me, why doesn't the private sector then just pick up the research? It's because research is hard. The odds of moving from a research discovery to a drug that makes it into your drug store for someone to prescribe to you, the failure rate is at least 1 in 50. So private companies don't want to play those odds, and I get it. They're just too distant. You have to have public investment in the basic research and in the clinical trials. That's a public good. It's just like having an army or building bridges. It's
Sure.
one of these things where we have to underwrite that because the motives to the private sector, they're just not there. They won't do it. That said, Trump has been both wielding a stick and a carrot. So the stick side is, I'm going to pull your grants. You don't play ball with me. You don't do what I want. And those grants, as you said, Don, they're 90% science. But when you cut Penn or Columbia, USC, whatever, you're chopping out the science support. The carrot part is he's issued this bananas statement, what he calls a compact for excellence that recently came
Oh
out,
God.
in
Yeah.
which he says, if you do what I say, then I'm going to make sure you have special access to money. And he invited 9 universities, a mystery list. I don't know how he decided on these particular 9 universities to invite them first, I guess. They included, by the way, University of Arizona, Brown, Dartmouth, Texas, Virginia, Vanderbilt. Anyway, I don't know how he got that list. But what he said was, I want to see all your admissions information. I'm going to determine how your admissions work at your schools for undergraduate and graduate. You can do this, you can't do that. You're going to get rid of departments in your schools which don't support conservative thinking, whatever that means. I don't know how you do that with respect to biochemistry, but okay. And I want you to basically make sure that everybody has to take a standardized test like the SAT before you can admit them. Well, there are a lot of schools that have gotten away from the SATs because they don't think they're accurate predictors of college or for that matter, professional school success. But in a nutshell, do we really want any president, I don't care who it is, or any government telling private universities how to operate? I don't. The one great virtue of American universities is that they've been independent and they can criticize the government. They can have right wing ideologies if they want. You can go to school in a political environment that you like if you want to, although I wouldn't.
Sure, you can.
I'd go to a big state school and, take the menu and see what's out there. But I hate this federal Trumpian, we're going to take control of the content and administration of our universities. The greatest intellectual contribution that America's ever made to the world is our universities. I mean, that's the best thing we ever did in terms of brain power and ideas and discoveries, and even for that matter, good literature and interesting, I'll say this,
Sure.
good poetry, whatever it is,
Hmm.
just having that freedom and watching it, people don't understand. You don't want to take that away in the name of ideology.
Oh, there was a lot of, at the time of the land grants for universities, for example, which has been nothing but a spectacular success.
Yeah,
There is absolutely no other way to measure it. People resisted it and said, well, no, you don't want to let everybody have education.
yeah.
And look what has happened. I mean, our entire way of life is actually derived from the wondrous education of many, many people, which led to the development of all sorts of new kinds of businesses. I
And
just think
agriculture, those land grant places drove
absolutely.
food production
Yeah.
in Illinois, Pennsylvania, Indiana. There are a ton of these land grant schools
Oh, they're
that
amazing.
really made a
Yeah.
contribution. And that lets me, an aside, I'll see what you think, John, but I think also there's something else going on, which is a war on the idea that college is a good thing. Now,
Hmm.
I'm first to admit that college is overpriced. It costs too much, and that's terrible. And we should have affordable college options for anybody who wants to go. But, mandatory high school graduation, I think, came from, I don't know what, 1830 or something.
Yes.
I would say mandatory college graduation is where the country should be going, not anti-college. And people say, well, we need tradespeople and it's fine to become a plumber. Hey, how about this? How about being a college educated plumber? Anything
Yeah.
wrong with that? No,
Yeah, can't think of that. That's not, yeah, it's not exclusive. That's not an
no.
exclusive standard. Yeah, let's have exquisitely educated stoneworkers and
Yeah,
people who lay streets and build bridges and
yeah,
whatever they do. If I could just add to this, it seems, and science is in on this too, that in a way this has a lot of attractiveness for people who didn't go to college and have felt that they were made to feel ashamed of
yeah.
that. And this brings up a topic that we have discussed before, but it bears discussing more, is that the folks who voted a certain way because they felt they were ignored were correct. They were right. There was something in the alignment of things that didn't pay as much attention to their needs and their outlooks as maybe they should have.
Mhm.
Lincoln said that good government is for the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and I think a lot of folks felt left out of that. Now there's a certain attractiveness, isn't there, from that viewpoint to the notion of, well, college education ain't such a thing.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there was that thing during the Obama era, it never got passed, but there was this initiative to make sure that in every state there was at least one state college campus that was free of charge.
Yeah, I'm for that. That's
You know,
let the private guys compete if they want to charge like NYU or somewhere, whatever it is, $100,000 a year
right.
to go there. Maybe it's worth it, maybe it isn't, but a free option, more community college access. And look, Donald Trump has sold a bill of goods, many bills of goods, but one that also drives me nuts. We're going to restore American greatness. And how are we going to do that? By going back to the 50s. We're going to have people digging coal and I assume assembling widgets on an assembly line somewhere, and they'll be singing songs from Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and all the other cultural icons of his time that he's going to award medals of freedom to. We'll get to
Yeah.
all soon. We're not going back that way. The jobs of tomorrow are going to be AI and automated, and you're going to need college to get a job. It's not going to do to just be a physically skilled laborer, because a lot of that stuff is going to get automated and driven by robots and AI bosses. And what his vision is so backward and so I'm almost this is like a policy of nostalgia or something. You can see it in every, I'm going to gold plate the White House and all this. We're not going to get great by going to the 50s.
Right. Plus, there are two things that occurred to me while we were talking. Number one was, if you're a carpenter, if you're a plumber, if you're a landscaper, you have to have math on a
Yeah.
very high level. You have to be able to know about 1/8 of an inch difference, because that's going to make the difference about whether or not your house stands or falls, and so on and so forth. So whether they know it or not, people who go into the trades need to be educated very fluently in some very advanced technology. Second of all,
I'll give you another reason. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead. Then I'll.
no, give me another reason and I'll go back.
We live longer. I know everybody thinks, because of COVID or whatever, we're dying at 16 or something. And sadly, we had an opioid epidemic that did ravage that group that was neglected, and they did die younger. But generally, lifespan has been getting longer. One reason to get educated is so that you can enjoy your retirement. That's simple.
Yeah.
You could read books, you could travel, you can take up a second career. If you will, it's partly a way to enjoy life. That's what a liberal arts education is about.
The other thing that I was going to mention, though, was that most states have a state university system.
Yeah.
I know that it exists in Pennsylvania. I know it existed in
Connecticut has it here.
in California when John and I was there. I know Texas has one. And the whole idea for the state system of education of the state universities was that they would provide education on a scale that state residents could afford.
Yes.
And of course, that's kind of gone off the rails now with the cost of education getting higher and higher. I will go back to your noting a couple of minutes ago that education is overpriced. It's pricing people out of the marketplace. And when you do that in any other place in the marketplace, like when grocery prices go higher, when car prices and home prices go higher, people just walk away from it. And I think we're at that point right now with education. It costs too much and people are walking away from it.
Little plug. NYU, which operates 2 med schools. I'm in the main campus in Manhattan, but we have one on Long Island in a rural area. We are totally tuition free. And we did it so that people who want to become doctors don't face heavy debts and wind up only becoming neurosurgeons to pay off, the loans and all the debt they have. Other med schools have done something like that, a few. And I think, again, the general principle, I don't know if we can make it free, but it's access. And so I'll say it again. There should be an option in every state, whether it's going through the community college system, 2 years, and then up to the bigger mothership. That's how Minnesota, for example, I think it has open admission.
New Jersey has it too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then, let's try and diminish costs for professions that we want. How about this? Like scientist, make it attractive to go into, and I'm not just talking about healthcare. I'm talking about, AI or computer science or engineering or whatever it is. So I don't think the right policy is to back away from education and to assault the universities. Trump does that because he and the Project 2025 people think it's just a nest of socialists poisoning the minds of students. I wouldn't deny that universities at the elite level tend to be lefty. I think we got data on that and we know that. But I think the obligation is then make sure that you teach students to be critical thinkers. I've never minded as a left-leaning academic communist if my students rip into me in class or write papers that point out what's wrong with I give them A's, they can go on
Yeah.
to do very well, and I'll credit them. What I'm looking for is good thinking, and
Yeah.
I'll even admit to biases or say, don't trust me totally on this. Look up this guy. He's got a different opinion. That's what we want from our universities. We don't need them to be assaulted. We just need them to get straightened out, if you want to put it that way.
Science is going to find out what science is going to find out. And that's the whole reason you do science. You formulate a question, you test the question until you know it's the right question. And half of science is figuring out what question to ask. And most questions end
Right.
up with tar in the test tube. It's, it's way more failure than success. But
Right.
there's something about science which cannot be controlled from the top. This is an effort to appear as though you can. This is an effort to say, "Oh, I'm going to control science." Science can't tell us,
Yeah.
Well, one of the things science tells us is that genetics is not the same as destiny. That race has next to no meaning. When you get down on the molecular level,
Yeah.
that it tells us a lot of things that a lot of people really hate to hear.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to watch a government attempt in a democracy to appear to be controlling what science does when really you can't. And especially if your economy rests very heavily on advancing with science, which we do. We're in a big war over AI, who will have the best, who will use it the best,
Yeah.
who will get there first. There's a huge, very high stakes race.
By the way, both
Yeah.
popes, the current one and the prior one, Leo now, have said the biggest challenge to humanity is AI, figuring out
Yes.
how to control it, what to do with it. And I know what they're afraid of. They're afraid of the, if you will, assault on truth, that people won't know and won't be able to distinguish fantasy from reality. Think again, I'm just using the Pope and the church there as an example. You've got a current Pope as a mathematician.
Yes.
Not like somebody said you can't square up religion and science, but again, the administration constantly has this view that religion is the enemy of science and vice versa. I've never felt that way.
No.
It's just they have different standards of belief. If you want to be
Right.
religious, it's probably faith. It's probably some notion of custom and tradition.
Of
That's not
course.
science, but they can live next door to each other. They might even have interesting things, as the current Pope is pointing out, to say to one another. I know that it took the church about 300 years to acknowledge Galileo. All right, they're slow, but
But it's also true, that in the early 50s, Pope Pius said evolution was cool.
Yeah.
He didn't see any
Yeah.
necessary conflict.
Yep.
I was just going to mention that, John. I don't know about your grade school education, but my grade school education, even into like the 8th grade, as we were working our way into high school, at a Catholic school, said you can believe in evolution. And I think the way they got around it was implied that at some point God stepped in and gave whatever this
a little zinger to get things rolling.
gave a soul to whatever monkey he was turning into a human. But the point is that I remember getting evolution taught to me in grade school at a Catholic school. So yeah, it hasn't.
Yes.
And by the
been-
way, church, that one and many others, have been vehement about the importance of getting vaccinated. We don't hear enough from mainstream religious voices on many of these science issues. I can't find a major religion. I can find a few oddball fringe ones, but no major ones oppose vaccination. They all think it's a duty. They think you should
Yes.
protect the community. They're
Mhm.
not anti-vaccine the way RFK Jr. suggests that that's so. I think religion, in a way, has been co-opted too. And I think their voices should be louder. They are in a position, I don't know how to put this another way, but my friends who teach at Jesuit universities or Augustinian ones in the Catholic tradition, like the Pope comes from the Augustinian sources, they want intellectual debate and
Yes.
inquiry. They're not just believe it because it's biblical literalism or whatever. But we don't hear them. We tend to hear, from other voices who are less open.
Yeah.
Well,
I went to a Catholic university as well. That was almost just by accident, I want to say. I was accepted to a certain number of universities, and Loyola in Los Angeles, which is now Loyola Marymount, fell into all of the categories that I needed to go to. So I went to that, not necessarily because it was a Catholic college, but because it met my criteria. And it happened to be Catholic too. But I will tell you, in the 4 years that I went there, that I spent many a day with a Jesuit arguing various philosophical ideas. And a lot of that was done at a bar because the Jesuits could drink me under the table. So you're right. I think we need to hear from religious voices who have been in the community, working with people, and know what the people's needs are and what a good response is to that. Those are the religious people we need to listen to, not the all right, I'm going to say it, I'm going to get probably yelled at for this, but not the evangelicals who have a more ethereal idea about the rapture and all that other stuff, but people who are religious and dealing day to day with life, I think.
Well, even on the evangelical and conservative tradition, it's not all of one voice. There are plenty of evangelicals who hate the idea that they're going to bend the knee to the king, to the politician. They don't see
Right.
that as
Yeah.
appropriate. And we don't hear from them. We just hear, from Trump's spiritual advisors who tend to be a little fawning and a little zany. But anyway, that would help to get all the way back to John's question. How do we balance off the feeling of neglect? Well, I think the way you do that is going local. So you need
This
local.
is excellent. That's an excellent. I'm right with it. Continue, please.
Yeah.
So I think, for example, criticism of scientists. They don't go out into the community enough. My colleagues at NYU, but it's true when I was at Penn or other fancy joints, they tend to stay in the lab, do their work, and figure that they'll get supported by the public because they'll produce something good, or just because they're very smart and people will defer to their being smart. If I went out to a small town near Don in Pennsylvania, I don't even know how many people have ever met a scientist, so to speak. That is, are they at the church? Do they go to the high school? Are they talking at the 4-H club? Do they show up at Kiwanis or the book club? Well, they should. They have to go out and make the case locally about why science is important, why public health matters. If you want to compete in a capitalist society, you need your health, why those with disabilities should be helped so that they can contribute, and so on and so on.
And so on. Yeah.
But it's at the local level that you win or lose. I'm guilty here because, in part, I spend time in the national media, and that's great if you want to talk to your friends who read the New York Times in Manhattan. But I also try to do a few local events around the country because I think that's where the action is.
We could end our discussion with a happy note, which is look at that fusion stuff, huh? I mean, it's working out. We're getting there. There was just another record set. We're coming out of this era where we take 25 years to build a machine. It gets a little tiny bit of fusion for 0.3 second, and the whole thing ends up being destroyed because that's what plasma tends to do. It's hotter than the sun, and if you actually start having plasma anywhere near your $25 billion machine, your torus, it tends to melt it.
Right.
So this is something we got to work on.
There
but
is
that's
good
sort of
news. It's
yes, that's
advancing.
really good
That
news.
it's true, and this is a source, for those who don't follow this, of really unlimited power. You're building a mini sun on Earth.
It's true, yes.
And that's why I was going to suggest maybe that work and its experimentation could take place back at 3 Mile Island where Don is. Just they're used to things melting through the Earth's crust and so on. So you perfect it out there and then things will be, but I do think you're right. That is optimistic. It is.
Yes.
We need power. One of the reasons we need it, people don't understand. You know how much power AI and our computerized world, let's just say if cryptocurrency, whatever that is, sucks up, I mean, it's ginormous. It takes energy and gobs. If you're going to have that future, we need something like fusion. Plus, sure, wind power, capture the sun itself from a distance. That's all great. I think there's a role even for some nuclear, but we need power. The other thing we're going to have to spend a little money on, you got to have an infrastructure to transmit the power. So even if we had it right now, I'm not sure even if we built it in Don's backyard just to keep the rest of us safe, we'd still have to get the power from there, out to the rest of
To
us.
the grid without
Yeah.
melting it.
Yeah.
I read something pursuant to this, that they're thinking that if they bring a working fusion generator online, they will have to have a way to sluice off about 90% of the generated energy, at least for the first generation of the machine. In other words, they'll have to dump 9 out of 10 joules of it, because otherwise they'll blow the entire the national fuse.
Right. The current sort of old-fashioned grid, it couldn't handle that thing would produce.
A lot of pennies in the fuse boxes at that point. Well, and also to round this thing out, you keep joking about my backyard, but TMI is in my backyard.
Yeah.
They had 2 units on the island. Unit 2 was the famous meltdown, but Unit 1 actually kept producing electricity until about 8 or 9 years ago, when they thought it was a little too expensive to continue, and they shut it down. So there was a whole thing about how they were going to mothball it, and of course, the big problem was how to mothball the melted down one, which still has radioactive material in it, and they're trying to figure out how to take care of that. But the latest wrinkle is Meta has decided it needs a lot of power to power its AI, so it wants to restart the first unit at TMI, and there are talks underway right now to start TMI Unit 1 to get 3 Mile Island running again, to provide the power so that Meta can give us all AI on our computers.
Are they going to privatize the whole thing?
Well, there's a private company that owns it, a private electrical company. And I think Meta is going to pay that private company to get the nuclear up and running. Of course, there was a little television debate about this, where the guy who owns Constellation, I believe is the name of the company that owns 3 Mile Island.
Okay. Yeah.
And the television reporter was talking to the owner of Constellation about how great this was, how it was the Constellation owner is going to provide jobs and energy and all this other stuff. And he's sitting in front of the board, which is 1970s vintage. So I don't know if they're going to redo that, but if they're not, it really looks like it's headed for problems.
Like something from The Simpsons.
Yes,
they have
exactly.
They have exactly. It's going to look just like that one, where they have the potentiometers and the slide things. And Don and I know very well from radio days. And oh my goodness!
And one other thing I need to say, and that is this AI. By the way, when it gets up and running, it's going to tap all of the misinformation that's being put out on the web, and it will formulate answers from the misinformation. So don't be surprised if you ask your AI about vaccines and it says, well, they cause autism.
Right. It already does that.
It does.
Vaccines, first 10 websites, all anti-vaccine sites.
They've been structured to get to the top of the queue every time.
Yeah.
So unless you defeat that structure, which is very difficult to do, they're always going to come up with the bad crap first.
And that's why, again, the Pope and many, many, many others are so concerned about disinformation and blurring the line between truth and falsity. And I am too. I do think that is one of the big challenges going forward. How are we going to try and make sure that we have, whatever our views about what to do, that we at least have accurate information to do it on? Nothing about that autism press conference makes me optimistic that it's going to happen soon.
Well, thank you, Art Caplan.
So I'm sorry, John, we blew your happy ending.
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah. But I just wanted to thank Art for coming on again. Art Caplan. We always have a ball. There's always too much to talk about. And it wasn't a complaint show. It was a show about what just happened in the news just this last week. And lot of stuff happened that involves medical science and how to think about science and medical ethics and the place of science in the community. And I can't think of a better person to have to talk about it than you, Art. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Or log into our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
Our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.